Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. And thank you also to the patrons who help make this podcast possible every single day with their support at patreon.com/SW7x7. So this is our deep dive episode related to episode 9 from season 3 of The Bad Batch. That's the Harbinger, and that is, of course, Asajj Ventress, none other. So it was, of course, a shock to see her in the trailer, and it was a shock to see her when she showed up in the episode. I mean, when you think about it, we've gone 8 episodes into the season. We only had 7 left, so she was bound to show up sometime, and yet somehow this season has actually been so compelling that I kind of forgot that we were going to be seeing her. So yeah, the moment of her appearance was really a bit startling. And back in January, when the trailer came out and she appeared, we talked about the possibilities for how she could be in The Bad Batch. And there were 2. One of them was that it was going to be a flashback kind of episode, and the other would be that she had been resurrected somehow. So now, as a result of this episode, we know the whole, oh my gosh, the word just flew out of my head. The flashback situation is not the answer. It is, in fact, a resurrection. Or, if you will, somehow Ventress returned. And there's even a bit of a wink and a nod in the episode about this when she says, as one of her departing lines to the Bad Batch, that, oh, I've got a few lives left. And you might not be surprised to learn that Dave Filoni seems to be the reason why this has happened. So supervising director Brad Rao in one of the stories on StarWars.com says Ventress is one of our all-time favorite characters. So when Dave brought up the idea of bringing her into the Bad Batch, we were beyond excited. And then Jennifer Corbett, who's an executive producer and the head writer for the show, says we had several discussions about the book, Dark Disciple, and how her story would continue. How she survived will be revealed in future content, but for this story, we were thrilled to include her and explore her unique connection to and compassion for Omega. And we actually flagged that on the podcast during our breakdown episode yesterday about Asajj Ventress seeming to have some sort of compassion for Omega, and how Fennec Shand seems to have had a similar kind of compassion for her and her circumstances. But that still doesn't explain how Ventress is back. And we were actually exposed to a new possibility in the Ahsoka series of how somebody could potentially be walking around even though they shouldn't be walking around. At least that's what it seemed like with Merrick. You remember that guy that looked like he was an Inquisitor and was fighting alongside Shin Hati on, oh gosh, whatever that planet was that they used to take the trip to Peridia. Anyway, you remember there was a fight and he bit the dust and a bunch of green mist came out of him and he was like, bah! And then died. So he was apparently encased in some sort of suit that kept his spirit alive and animated in there, and once it was punctured, that was the end of him. Clearly, that's not the case with Ventress, so that leaves us with the 2 options, one canon-ish and one Legends for sure, that we discussed back in January. The Legends one being a Sith trance that is so deep that it looks like it's death and it's a healing trance. That's something that Asajj did herself in Legend storytelling, so that also lends itself as a strong possibility. And the other is that in canon storytelling, and particularly laid out in role-playing games, so yeah, it's kind of a reach for most people in the depths of their canon knowledge, but apparently if a Night Sister is only recently deceased, then it's entirely possible that they can be resurrected, and resurrected not as a zombie, but as who they were. Now, in theory, this could be what happened with Ventress, because not long after she was dead, she was put in a stasis field by the Jedi for transport to Coruscant, where she was then prepared for burial. She was put in a coffin, and that's where things get a little dicey. Whether she was in a stasis field within the coffin as well, yeah, we don't necessarily know that for sure. But then she was transported to Dathomir and then put into the Water of Life, where she was welcomed back by Night Sister spirits who distinctly, according to the Jedi present, including Quinlan Vos and Obi-Wan Kenobi, heard the word sister uttered out of nowhere. But the point is that for a good chunk of time, it seems like she, Asajj Ventress, had been kept in stasis after her death for a good chunk of time, which would kind of help the idea of being able to be resurrected by only being recently deceased. Obviously, we don't know what that recently means necessarily. And then the other factor of things is that there had to be another Night Sister around to kind of do, resurrection chants and spells and whatnot. And the only obvious possibility for that would be Merrin from Jedi Fallen Order. And it's really kind of interesting when you think about the fact that there have been Jedi Fallen Order references in the Bad Batch this year. Most recently in the Bad Territory episode, that's episode 8, where the guy that Fennec Shand is after is nicknamed the Slayer of Ordo Eris. That's the place where the Haxian brood was hanging out and where they took a kidnapped Cal Kestis to fight in their fighting pits. And the other thing too, and this maybe is, a little too far-fetched, but I thought it was kind of interesting. The Varathian, that giant sea monster that shows up in the episode, that really, based on the description in Dark Disciple, kind of sounds like the Sleeper. It sounds like a similar creature. There's reference to the Sleeper kind of taking on different forms based on what would be most fearful to any person who encountered it on Dathomir. But yeah, just some of the offhand descriptions of some said it's this and some said it said that. Yeah, kind of reminded me of the Sleeper that Varathian did. Now, Quinlan Voss did kill the Sleeper in Dark Disciple, at least as far as we know. So yeah, again, tenuous and tangential at best, but yeah, it kind of gave me one of those little, oh, wait a second kind of moments. Now, earlier this year, I also talked about how many episodes I thought Asajj Ventress would show up in, and I thought that it would probably be less than half, and so far, that seems to be an accurate prediction. I think I said 3 ultimately as the number I was going to put my chips on. And that feels accurate too, based on what happened in this particular episode. But what's more is it got me thinking not only about Asajj, but also Fennec Shand, about how these characters, when they create them in animation for a situation like the Bad Batch, they often don't do it as one-shot kind of things. These characters have a tendency to be brought in because they're thinking, like, if we're going to go to the trouble of creating the animation and everything that needs to be done on the technical side of things for these characters to come to life, that we might as well, make sure that we're doing it if we have them invested in the story, if we have them appearing in multiple episodes. So yes, I am very confident that we're going to see more of Asajj and actually more of Fennec Shand in this season. And again, I would love to know what you think. Are we going to see them again, either one or both? If you are catching this on YouTube, comments are right there. On Spotify, there's a Q&A section right there. And if you're listening anywhere else, please go to the blog post for this show's episode at sw7x7.com. Those 7s are numbers. It's SW, the number 7, the letter X, and the number 7.com. Oh, one last thing, just to close a loop that I didn't quite close. So that guy Merrick in the Ahsoka series, right? So it was basically a spirit encased in a suit, right? And I did say that that doesn't seem like it's the case with Asajj, but also there's no, kind of trailing spirit energy the way that Morgan Elspeth seemed to have in the Ahsoka series. So that also seems to augur for the idea of a resurrected after recently dead answer to the whole situation. And that's what I've got for you on this episode of the podcast. If you enjoy the show, please share it with other Star Wars fans that you know. Help more people find this daily dose of Star Wars joy and add it to their lives. Please consider liking and following and subscribing and joining, all that fun stuff, and leaving a rating or review if you haven't done so already. And I hope you'll consider it would be just the cost of a cup of coffee, basically, once a month. If you really believe that this show is awesome and worth people's time, you can do that and help support its creation and production and distribution over at patreon.com/SW7x7. And it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for this episode. As always, may the Force be with you, wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.